today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Ms. Tracy Cook. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast, Simplify Management of Nano Server and Windows Server 2016 HyperV, sponsored by Five9 Software. I'm Tracy Cook with Virtualization Review, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We're very pleased that you could attend today. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Please feel free to type your questions into the Ask a Question box on the console at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many of your questions as we can during the live event. For more information related to Five9, please go to the resource list icon on the bottom of your console, and there you'll find additional materials. And finally, the entire webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. We'll send you an email when the replay is available, and that should be in approximately 24 to 48 hours. And you can access the replay using the same link you used today. And now on to our speaker. Our speaker today is Symon Perriman. He's the Five9 Software Vice President of Business Development. Previously, he was Microsoft's Senior Technical Evangelist and Worldwide Technical Lead covering virtualization and cloud infrastructure. As one of Microsoft's most recognized faces, Symon trained millions of IT professionals, holds several patents and dozens of industry certifications, and in 2013 co-authored Introduction to System Center 2012 R2 for IT professionals. Symon is also an active entrepreneur, currently serving as president of sports tech startup FanWide. So we're in great shape today with Symon, and I'm so glad he's here. Symon, I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Thank you for the introduction, and welcome everybody. In today's session, we're going to be covering a lot of the best practices around how you can use Nano Server as a new technology and a great way to really optimize your data center and to start to think about building cloud-ready, scalable applications. We're going to start off by going through some of the best practices around Nano Server, looking at the design, understanding conceptually what it's about, and which scenarios you're going to want to use it in. We'll then take a look at some of the installation options and best practices around that, and we'll focus the core of the presentation on management, taking a look at some of the inbox management tools, and then taking a look at Five9 Manager for HyperV, the only Nano Server management with a full GUI. Let's go ahead and first get started and give you a quick introduction to Nano Server to understand how we got there. Now, if you've been working with IT for a while, you're probably familiar with the old way of installing features and roles. Back in Server 2003 and Windows NT, you essentially had all of the different features and roles pre-installed for you. So this meant when you went and installed this version of Windows Server, no matter what you're actually using that server for, all of those different servicing components, binaries, and features, they were already turned on and enabled. Now, this is great from the convenience factor. However, it meant that the image itself was very large. And also the fact that it had more components running in it meant that there was a slightly higher security risk, as there are just more different pieces that need to be patched, needed to be maintained. With Windows Server 2008 R2, Microsoft took a slightly different approach. First, they separated the core Windows Server product into two versions or two installation options. You have the full server with the graphical user interface, and you have Server Core, which is a stripped-down one. It has a very small interface, essentially command line only. Additionally, when you go and turn on a specific feature or a role, you go and install the binaries at that time. So this meant that if you were going to use your server as a HyperV host, you would go and install the HyperV components only at that time. And this meant that there were fewer components to service and made things more secure. Microsoft continued this path with the Windows Server 2012 release, where they actually have several different GUI-less options, with one of the options just being the absolutely basic shell. So here, you can get the full version of Windows Server, you can get a minimal interface, and you can go and get the core. And again, like with 2008 R2, all of the different components had to be installed separately. So what you've seen here is Microsoft's essentially been on this path of separating the operating systems, making them more isolated, more secure, and really only including things which you need. And this is the path and approach that they've taken with Windows Server 2016, and specifically Nano Server. Now, Nano Server was designed with a slightly different approach. What you saw with Server 2012, 2012 R2, is that Microsoft started with all of the components in the box and essentially stripped away the pieces that were not needed, and that became Server Core. With 2016 and Nano Server, Microsoft's actually taken a different approach entirely and started building Nano Server from the ground up. So instead of removing components that weren't necessary, they started with a base installation and only added components that were necessary. So what you'll find with Nano Server is it's extremely small, extremely efficient, and it's going to be very secure simply because there's almost nothing running in it. Now, of course, when you have fewer components to service, that means you have to install fewer updates, which means you have fewer reboots, which also leads to higher service availability as well. Now, if you're like most businesses, you're probably running 24/7, so it is important to reduce that servicing and that maintenance overhead so that you can keep your services running 24/7 and keep your customers happy. Now, the way Nano Server is installed with Windows Server 2016 is you actually have to go and take the binary components and go and create your own virtual hard disk. Now, this is slightly different from what you may be used to. Traditionally, when you installed an older version of Windows Server, you would have the option of installing either the full GUI interface or Server Core as you go through the setup wizard. With Nano Server, there is no setup wizard. And if you go through that Windows Server setup wizard, you will actually not see Nano Server. So I really want to emphasize the point here. Configuring Nano Server isn't traditional. It's done through a different process, and you're essentially creating a virtual hard disk and only adding the components that you want to it. Now, another thing to keep in mind is what Nano Server can be used for, what it's really optimized for. And Microsoft is really pushing Nano Server as a platform for virtualization and cloud-based applications. So what exactly is a cloud-based application? Well, think about if you use any type of public cloud service like Microsoft Azure or AWS. When you actually go and deploy a service, you're not necessarily deploying a virtual machine. You're deploying a set of functionality, such as a service plane or a networking component. Microsoft wants you to think of Nano Server like this. It's not necessarily going to be the best fit for traditional workloads like SQL Server running in a VM, but it is going to be optimized for those cloud-ready applications, websites, things that need to suddenly scale up. And you're going to hear a little bit about containers shortly as another way that we can go and build these cloud-ready applications using Nano Server. Now, the key features of Nano Server is first, zero footprint model. We've essentially removed everything from the product. And so when you go and add a feature, such as installing compute so that you can run HyperV virtual machines, you actually go and inject the binaries into the image during the creation process. So again, you start off with just a blank Nano Server image, and then you go and add the different roles and components that you want. Here's a couple of them, and we'll go take a look at a list shortly as well. But primarily, we're seeing people use this for HyperV, storage clustering, and then a couple of different roles that don't require a lot of user interface. As you can probably expect, following that model of Server Core, there is no graphical user interface whatsoever. In fact, it's only a command line and a very limited command line at that as well. But again, that's to make things more secure and make the image smaller. Now, it does support Windows Server drivers as well. So most of the traditional drivers that you would expect with Windows Server are still going to be supported. Now, if you are working with third-party drivers, as a best practice, make sure you check with the third party to ensure that their solutions do work on Nano Server. Microsoft has tried hard to make sure that there are no regressions, but there are limitations around what type of code can be executed on Nano Server. So do not just assume that things will work for Nano Server. Make sure that you do check with that vendor to confirm. The good news is, with 5.9, we make sure that all of our services and solutions are Nano Server ready. Another option that you'll see installed with the Nano Server is the ability to turn on and connect to Microsoft's malware agent. Now, Microsoft's malware agent uses Windows Defender. Now, in the past, you would actually have to go and install this agent on the Nano Server or on the virtual machine. With Windows Server 2016, this agent now comes built in, so there's no additional step of having to log in and install the agent. What this means is, after you've launched your Nano Server virtual machine, you can start immediately monitoring it and protecting it using this agent, which is already pre-configured and pre-installed, with the idea that as soon as that VM comes online, you want to be protecting it. Additionally, the System Center Virtual Machine Manager and Operations Manager components and agents are already built into the image as well. This means that, again, as soon as that Nano Server virtual machine comes online, Virtual Machine Manager can connect to it and start managing it, and Operations Manager can connect to it and start monitoring it. Again, this vision of getting things up and running as fast as possible and minimizing the administrative involvement. Now, Nano Server is also optimized for containers. So I'm going to spend a moment trying to describe what a container is and how you want to think about that in relation to a traditional virtual machine. Now, the way we want to think about separating these is with a traditional virtual machine, you get all of the components running inside that VM. And what I mean by that is if you create a virtual machine with SQL Server, that SQL Server is embedded into the virtual machine image. There is no separation. If you want to go and clone that SQL Server, you have to go and clone that entire virtual machine. Now, what we try to do with containers is separate the application layer from the operating system. So with a traditional virtual machine, we have hardware, we have our operating system and our applications on the host, and then within the VM, you see the same thing, the operating system and the applications. And again, you cannot go and separate that application. It is embedded. Now, what we try to do with a container is essentially separate the operating system entirely from any of the applications. Some people consider this similar to AppV, or application virtualization. There are a couple nuances that make it different, but that's one way to kind of think about containers, is essentially taking a component of the application and virtualizing it. Now, this gives us a lot of benefits when we go and use this model, because these containers are independent units. And what this means is I can go and clone this container, I can scale it out, I can migrate it, I can place it on a different host or even in a different cloud, and it should still operate the exact same way. So this gives us a lot more flexibility. Now, the downside of containers is that you are actually sharing the kernel. Now, the kernel is the underlying code of a computer system. And one of the downsides of containers here is whenever you share some of that underlying code, it means other people have access to it. And it means potentially another person that has access to the kernel could do some type of attack or spoof you, and it could impact your container. So a lot of people say, well, containers seem great, they give me the efficiency, but they don't offer the separation that I need. And what you're going to start to see here is a combination of Windows Server containers and HyperV containers. Essentially, you can make a container on a host or a VM. Now, a lot of people still say, okay, what's the best practice? When do I use a container? When do I use a traditional virtual machine? Well, you want to think about using a container anytime you're building a cloud-ready application. Again, one of those dynamic ones that can scale. And Nano Server is a key component of this because Nano Server supports containers. So the way we usually break it down or make the recommendation to customers is that each of your individual tenants or users or applications, give them a single virtual machine because that guarantees the isolation. And then within that virtual machine, you can go and create different containers that share the kernel. So this kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You have isolation at the virtual machine level, and then within that virtual machine, you have that agility, that flexibility of using a container within it. So a good example here is, you might be administrator hosting Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Coca-Cola and Pepsi don't want to go and share the same back-end services, so we put them each in their own VM. But within that, all of the Coca-Cola services can share information and data, and similarly, all the Pepsi ones can do that inside their isolated virtual machine. Now, with all of these different pieces coming together, Microsoft did some benchmarking tests. They wanted to see how efficient is Nano Server really? What are the benefits that we can offer? And so here's some great data. Now, this data was also based on the Technical Preview 5. Microsoft has not yet released its RTM test data, but we do expect these numbers to be even higher. So they're already impressive, but Nano Server will continue to be tweaked and improved to make it even more secure and more performant. First here, you'll notice that we have different drivers. There's significantly less that need to be loaded in Nano Server. This means that it's going to start faster, and it means there's fewer components you have to service. In the middle, we see the number of services which are required to run Nano Server as opposed to a traditional virtual machine. And it's almost half. This means, again, the Nano Server will start faster, fewer components. There's only 11 ports open compared to 26. This means that the attack surface is much smaller. Fewer agents or components are trying to communicate with that Nano Server. So again, it's more isolated and more secure. We then take a look at the number of processes which are running, slightly fewer. As we take a look at the amount of memory to boot, we see that this is significantly lower as well. So this means that your Nano Server is going to start faster and scale up quicker. So these are probably the most impressive statistics here, is around deployment and setup time. Now, deploying the Nano Server, getting it running, very, very quick. Just takes a couple of seconds. And so you're going to see people really try to think about using Nano Server for these cloud services that want to dynamically and quickly scale. One of the most common cloud examples you've probably heard about, which is great for Nano Server, is the website example. You have a business, it's running on the cloud, and all of a sudden you get mentioned in the news or media. You have a lot more traffic coming to your site than you ever expected. But taking advantage of monitoring and then using Nano Server, you can quickly spin up more websites, more VMs to go and take that load without losing any customers and making sure everybody has a great, consistent experience. Now, you're also going to save money with your Nano Server deployment just on the amount of storage space it takes up as well. The basic footprint is about 400 megabytes, instead of the traditional Windows Server footprint being about 5.5 gigabytes. So if you're running hundreds, maybe thousands of virtual machines, and you can start to convert them over to Nano Server VMs, that's going to free up a lot of storage capacity as well that you can reclaim and focus on other areas. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our first survey question. So if I could ask the audience to switch over to your interface here, and we're going to ask you, how many HyperV hosts are currently in your environment? Is it 0 to 10, 10 to 30, 31 to 50, or over 50? So let us know how big is the data center which you're trying to manage today. And we'll keep this poll open for about 5 or 10 more seconds. But this is interesting to others. It helps us understand our own customer demographic and see what type of customers are most interested in Nano Server. All right, let's take a look at the results here. And it looks like a majority of people here would be more towards the SMB space. So we have about 10% with large, but most of the customers here are running about 0 to 10 or 11 to 30. Thanks for the feedback, everybody. Next, we're going to go and take a look at some of the best practices around installation of Nano Server. Now, as we mentioned, the Nano Server binaries have to be consumed separately. There's no wizard that you click through that will go and set up Nano Server for you. You essentially have to go into the file system, copy the binaries, and then go through a series of setup steps. Microsoft has done a good job of documenting those steps. And it's essentially a series of different PowerShell commandlets that you will run to create the VHD, to enter different questions such as your security information, and then customize it. Now, that by itself has caused some people to have some trouble. So Microsoft released an out-of-band tool, which we highly recommend you use, known as the Nano Server Image Builder. Now, this is free. However, with it being free, technically it's not supported by Microsoft. So there are some bugs which people have found using this, but in general, this is going to be a huge time saver. So again, strongly recommend that you take a look at the Image Builder. And it's essentially going to go through all the steps that you would have to go and type up as a PowerShell commandlet, where you can actually pick the disk format. You select which roles and features to install based on what the workload will be. Add your drivers, add machine information, join the directory, allow outside connections, set up the network configuration so you can connect to it, add different types of service packages such as Windows Update, and even launch scripts the first time it runs. Now, one of the biggest challenges people still have when working with Nano Server is the fact that there still is no graphical user interface. So if you misconfigure the networking connections when you go and set it up, you may actually have trouble connecting to the Nano Server itself. So there is one tool that I'll briefly mention here as well, known as the Emergency Management Service Console, or EMS. And what this allows you to do is essentially simulate a serial port that's connected to the Nano Server image itself to give you basic keyboard access. Think of this as going to your own data center and actually plug in a monitor and the mouse into the back of one of the servers. When you need that direct access, you cannot connect it over the network. So this is a good little tip and trick. If you do get locked out, go ahead and use the EMS. Now, when you've gone and finished the Nano Server image, you go and get your virtual hard disk that you can go and deploy as a virtual machine or on a physical host by using the boot from DHD command. Now, that's the installation best practices here. Let's ask another question about when do you plan on rolling out Nano Server? So if you could switch back to the polling interface, we're wondering whether people are going to be rolling it out in less than 6 months, in about 6 to 12 months, or over a year, or maybe you don't know yet. So we've heard from Microsoft great adoption of Nano Server. People are interested. So we want to know, how quickly will you be rolling out? Take a look at the results now. So it looks like fairly split. A lot of people are undecided as well. Well, hopefully for those undecided people, by the time we wrap up this webinar today, you're going to see how easy Nano Server management can be using Five9's tools, and hopefully that'll convince you to deploy even sooner. All right, let's move on and talk about management of Nano Server. There are several different tools which are provided by Microsoft to do Nano Server management. But the reality is, this has kind of been a gap in Microsoft's management solutions. Nano Server was developed somewhat late, and it really does not have any type of built-in management interface. There's no GUI whatsoever. You literally just get that command prompt. So there are different ways to manage it, but you have to use several different tools. Now, the first tool that you can use for managing Nano Server is PowerShell Core. And this is a slightly different version of PowerShell than the traditional one because it has some of the commandlets stripped out of it so that they can make sure that it gets executed correctly on a Nano Server. So for example, commandlets such as launching an interface or launching a browser or launching built-in help, things like that, those have been stripped simply because that's not going to work on Nano Server. So they don't want any consistency. So by cutting it down and saying you have to use PowerShell Core, it's going to reduce the number of incompatibilities that we will see. But for those people that don't like using scripts, there are the built-in tools of Server Manager, HyperV Manager, and Failover Cluster Manager. But these don't really do anything unique or specific for Nano Server. They treat it just like a traditional virtual machine. So you still have the same management troubles using Microsoft's built-in tools, whether it's Nano Server or a traditional virtual machine. Too many consoles, inconsistent naming. So it really makes it hard for people to get started using the inbox tools. But we are going to show you two here. One is the Server Management tool, and then second is Five9 Manager. Let's quickly jump back to the emergency management console. I touched on this briefly as well, but here's a little more information. With this emergency management console, again, this is the component that lets you connect to the serial port and directly access your Nano server if you have a network misconfiguration and cannot communicate to it directly. But here's SMT, or server management tools. Now, the way you want to think about this is a way to do configuration of your Nano server remotely. However, it does not give you end-to-end functionality of managing it on a day-to-day operational basis. So what I mean by that is, this gives you a set of toolboxes so that you can monitor the health of your Nano server. You can take a look at the performance monitor, services, you can start it up, shut it down, and even do remote commands against it. But essentially, it's kind of like a glorified task manager, still giving you the ability to monitor the health of your Nano server, but not really do anything operationally. So this is a great tool if you're deploying lots of different Nano servers to kind of help you get started and to start doing monitoring of the health and the performance of them. The downside of using SMT is it is based on Azure. And that means that there's a certain Azure component which you need to install in your own data center known as ARM, or the Azure Resource Manager. So essentially this means you have to go and set up an IIS website that is running that Azure Resource Manager. Once that's running in the background, then you'll be able to connect to it and take advantage of all the SMT server management tools. So my best practice here is, if you're a larger organization, and you really are going to invest in this, this is a great utility to kind of get you set up and running. If you're smaller and maybe only configuring a couple Nano servers, setting up all of this infrastructure on the back end is probably too much for the benefits that you get out of it. So really kind of look at this as a trade-off of the time, resources, to see whether it makes sense building this infrastructure to get this functionality. And now before we go and start to talk about Five9 Manager and show you how we can do end-to-end management and operations to Nano Server, we do want to ask our third poll question here. So if you could switch back to the interface and let us know which of the following is the most painful HyperV challenge which you face today. Is the challenge you're struggling to automate repetitive tasks? Do you struggle with the centralized management or lack thereof it? Do you struggle with performance monitoring? PowerShell scripting? And we have another option as well, other. And if you have another challenge that you want to list in other, if you could, please actually type that into our chat interface, because we'd actually really like to hear what these challenges are that you're facing, to see whether those are things which we may already be able to solve for you. All right, let's take a look at the results here. So it looks pretty split again. Performance monitoring definitely appears to be a big one that's come up, and centralized management. Well, that's great feedback, and we'll certainly go through the list of the others after the event and follow up with people if we have any individual questions about some of their challenges. Now with that, we're going to go and talk to you a little bit about Five9 and how Five9 Manager is the only GUI designed for Nano Server. First of all, a little bit about our organization. Our company was founded almost a decade ago. We've been working exclusively on HyperV solutions. And that's really what's unique about Five9, is we're not building solutions that are all-purpose and trying to make them fit for HyperV. We are building for HyperV from the ground up, embracing Nano Server, Azure Public Cloud, Azure Pack, Azure Stack, all of the Microsoft ecosystem, so that we have consistent and integrated solutions. We're going to be focused today on Five9 Manager, which is a centralized monitoring platform for HyperV. It allows you to do all your day-to-day management and operations, as well as things such as performance monitoring, and has a centralized console, some of the two biggest challenges which everybody mentioned on the webinar. We also have a security solution known as Five9 Cloud Security. Our big value here with this is that it is fully agentless. So what this means is you can protect all of your virtual machines without ever having to install anything on the virtual machine itself. So it gives us simple, unified management, including a variety of different tools optimized for HyperV, with antivirus, intrusion detection, virtual firewalls, and network analytics. We also have a VMware to HyperV and Azure migration tool. So if you're currently a VMware user, considering moving over to HyperV, download our free tool. It's going to allow you to do migrations straight to HyperV. And we also have a paid version that will allow you to do migrations from VMware over to Azure as well. So check this out as a great way to start to migrate over. Now, our biggest challenge, though, that we hear from Nano Server is the GUI. But that is not going to be a problem anymore with Five9 Manager. What we've essentially done with our management product that we use for HyperV is tweak it and customize it for Nano Server. We've done what Microsoft wanted to do if they had had time using System Center and HyperV Manager to make Nano Server a first-class system. And in fact, we've been developing for Nano Server for over 1.5 years already. So as soon as the first betas came out, as we got early access as an engineering team, we've been building this. We've been working with the Microsoft team, their engineers, the Nano Server executives, even with people such as Jeffrey Snover, making sure that we can provide a great Nano Server management experience. Now, Five9 Manager itself is easy to use and centralized. What we found was a lot of customers that have tried to use System Center have been unsuccessful because of its high cost, its complexity to set up, and the fact that it requires dedicated hardware and additional SQL licenses just to get the management infrastructure up and running. Five9 Manager is clean, easy to set up, easy to install. And as you'll see, the interface even looks a lot like VMware's vCenter, which makes it much easier for VMware administrators to transition over to HyperV, a much more consistent experience that will lower the training costs and help speed up onboarding. Let's go ahead and switch over to our demo, and we're now going to spend most of the rest of the session taking a look at the product in action and how we can optimize management for Nano Server. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And what you're taking a look at is the dashboard for Five9 Manager. We have several different Nano Server hosts, which we're currently managing, and several different Nano Server virtual machines. So here we can go and expand our Nano Server cluster. Now again, Nano Server can run as a host. It can run as a virtual machine, either option. And so we wanted to make sure that we can support both here. And using Nano Server as a host is actually a great way to reduce the amount of overhead and processing that your hosts have. So if you can set up a Nano Server host and manage it effectively, we highly recommend that you do this. Again, fewer components to service, fewer reboots, higher availability. Now, I'm going to walk you through here and show you how we can provide all of these management features for Nano Server. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice with Five9 Manager is we have a nice summarized view. And we can summarize our information at the data center level, at the cluster level, at the host level, and even down to the individual virtual machine. And so this allows you to have granularity and visibility throughout the entire data center. And you'll see that we roll up useful information here, such as errors, disk availability, different components like that. The next thing that we focus on with our Nano Server is actually managing the hosts themselves. So here you see I have 2 hosts which are made into a cluster. What I can actually do is connect to one of these hosts here, and I could access it directly through the console, do configuration. But one of my favorite features here as well are the HyperV settings. What this does is it allows me to go and configure common settings for my Nano Server host and then apply those changes to every other Nano Server in my data center so that I have consistent settings. So let's say, for example, I wanted to go and increase the number of live migrations up to 10. I can simply click Apply this to other hosts. We'll copy the migration settings, and I will go and apply it over to Nano Server node number 2. So nice and streamlined, straightforward, making sure that I get that consistency throughout my data center. We also have the ability, let me just expand that again. We also have the ability to go and configure different types of properties on the Nano Server host as well. So from here, I can go and configure my disk settings or my different virtual machine settings, and even go and configure remote management or do traditional maintenance operations on this host, such as shutting it down. Or since it's a cluster, I can actually pause the node, put it into maintenance, and drain those virtual machines off it when it's time to service it. Now, beyond the host management, we started to build in a lot of features that you would expect to find with traditional HyperV management, such as HyperV Manager itself. Now, with our version of HyperV Manager, we've made it a little cleaner and provided a lot more options to allow you to control and filter your different virtual machines. So from here, we can actually enter text, which will search and filter, and we can even do custom filtering options. So we can go and sort in different ways. We can go add different variables that we want to search by, and we can even create different conditional statements as part of our filtering. So if, for example, I want to go and find all virtual machines that start with a certain value and are in a certain state, we can enter this information, and it's going to go and cleanly give me the VMs that I care about. Now from here as well, we give you options that you would expect for normal virtual machine management, even though it's running on a Nano Server, connecting to the VMs by different protocols. If it's a Nano Server virtual machine, you actually will not see the option to connect via RDP. Nano Server itself does not support the remote desktop protocol, so that's one of the challenges with connecting to it, another reason why the emergency management console is popular. We then have the ability to take any of your virtual machines as well and go and configure the settings for them like you would for any other virtual machine, letting you configure the storage, the network, the memory, all these different components that you would expect. We do not care whether it's a Nano Server virtual machine or a traditional one. We're going to give you all of the appropriate options. And again, if there are any limitations on the Nano Server virtual machine, we'll make sure that we're aware of that and build those changes into the console so that you're not going to get tricked up and accidentally misconfigure something for Nano Server that you shouldn't be allowed. Now beyond this, we have traditional operations for the virtual machines, starting them, stopping them, connecting to them, pausing them. And we do have a couple of other advanced options that even System Center doesn't allow, such as enabling replication for the virtual machines. If you want to go and provide this as a way to do disaster recovery using the built-in HyperV Replica technology. Now beyond that, a lot of people also like our ability to go and clone a virtual machine. What we actually do is allow you to clone it not just once and create a single copy, but you can go and create multiple instances and multiple copies of a virtual machine. So if you really are trying to find an efficient way to go and clone to scale things up, this is a great utility as well. Now after our virtual machine configuration, well actually one other thing that's worth noting here as well is we support every guest operating system which HyperV supports. So this includes all of the different versions of Windows Server, Windows Client, and a variety of different Linux and Unix distributions. Red Hat, CentOS, and Ubuntu. If HyperV supports it, we support it. We don't place any arbitrary limitations on what we can do. Now the next setup that you'll have to go through once you've created the virtual machines is configuring the networks that they're going to run on. And we have an interface very similar to what you get with HyperV Manager, where you can go and configure your different networking settings, internal connections, external, private, whatever you need here. And you can even go and configure settings and different types of extensions for these networks as well. Next thing that we have is disk management. So if I go back to my Nano Server host, take a look at the summary of any of my virtual machines, we'll go and see the ability that we can go and edit the disks and get information about them, what the storage capacity is, how much free space there is. But probably one of the most popular features and certainly one of the biggest pain points that everybody mentioned is the ability to do performance monitoring. And this is built straight into Five9 Manager. Now the challenge that a lot of people have if they're using System Center is that to do monitoring of their virtualization stack, they actually need to use Operations Manager as well. So Virtual Machine Manager will collect the data, it will send it over to Operations Manager, but Operations Manager itself is going to have to go and render the graphs and do the alerts. So it's yet another component you have to set up. All of our monitoring is built straight into the console. So what you're going to see here is real-time monitoring for the CPU, memory, disk, and network. You also get some tasks up here that allow you to find and quickly identify which resources are the top consumers for all of your memory, CPU, or disk I/O. We also bubble up the alarms, making that even easier for you to use and understand. But showing real time isn't enough. We give you the ability to go back and actually take a look at historical data as well. Let's say you come into the office on Monday and something's crashed over the weekend. Well, using these tools, you can actually go and load the different logs to see what your utilization was like over the past week, past month, or however long you keep and retain your data for, which will be based on the size of your database. Now, beyond monitoring, one of the other features that people really like a lot, especially when they're getting set up, is to run the system status report. What the system status report does is it goes and runs several different queries on your host and on your virtual machine. And it's going to go and collect and inventory the data. So if you're in an industry that has compliance requirements or reporting needs, this is a useful utility where you can just run your report once a week, and it's going to document the entire configuration, what the VMs are doing, and also the different settings and components within each of them, down to all of the individual granular settings for every virtual machine. And from here, you can go and export it to different formats, save it, publish it, so that other people can go and view and understand the health of your host. Now, after we go through our system status reports, we find that most people will then want to go and run their best practice analyzers. We'll go ahead and switch my virtual machine here. Now, the way that we like to go and integrate all of our logs as well is by being able to select a specific virtual machine and pull all of the different type of login information into it as well. So if we take a look at this, we've actually gone and consumed all of the different HyperV and cluster logs, pulled them all into the HyperV Manager console so that you can make troubleshooting even easier. Now, one of the other tools that I like here as well is the Best Practice Analyzer. Now, the Best Practice Analyzer does not work on Nano Server hosts because the actual commandlets to run that are not available. However, Best Practice Analyzer is going to be an extremely useful tool for you for all of your non-Nano Server hosts and virtual machines. And what the Best Practice Analyzer does is call a variety of different built-in tools and Best Practice Analyzers provided by Microsoft, but brings them all into one place. Previously, you would have to go to several different interfaces and consoles to be able to run all of these, but we centralize it. Now, our best practice to people deploying HyperV for the first time is go and run this report once a week. Go through tests, try to iterate on it, and fix all of those small things. Run the report the next week, and gradually work your way down the list. By being able to pass all of these different best practice analyzer tests and configuration, you're going to make sure that you have the most stable and most secure infrastructure possible. And Five9 makes it easy by rolling this all into one. Now, another thing that people really find useful as well is being able to send yourself an email whenever something happens in the environment. So if I go down to take a look at my options here, I have a series of notification settings. And from here, I can go and configure an SMTP server that's going to go and send me an automatic email whenever something happens. So I can specify my name, specify the recipients, and then I can specify what criteria or conditions I want to send an alert on. So this means that you guys don't have to sit in front of the console. You could just work from home and proactively monitor things, and if you get an alert, then go and reactively take care of the issue. Now from this as well, you have lots of different settings and thresholds that you can configure. The next one I'm going to show you is our next feature, which is known as Optimizer. And these are different thresholds that we can set. What the optimizer feature does is it mirrors System Center's dynamic optimization feature, or VMware's distributed resource scheduler DRS. Essentially, what you can do is configure monitoring on your hosts, and if any of these criteria or thresholds are passed, we're going to detect that and automatically trigger a live migration to a different host. This way, we're load balancing those virtual machines across the different hosts. And by distributing the load, we're in theory going to minimize the impact on each of those different hosts, meaning that you get more workload and each of those virtual machines can perform better. So there's the settings, but let's actually take a look at the optimizer in action. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go and set up our optimizer on our Nano Server host. So from here, I go and say I want to go and add my cluster. We'll call this our demo group. We're going to specify our thresholds, 90% CPU, we do a live migration, 90% memory gets passed, we do a live migration, 100% CPU utilization. That all sounds good. We'll select which virtual machines can be moved around. We'll click Finish, and we've now gone and created this monitoring rule. What happens now is we do the real-time monitoring of these different thresholds, and again, if any of them gets passed, gets exceeded, we'll go and trigger the live migration. And if you hook that into the mail system, we'll also send you an alert to let you know that it's happening. Now, another thing that's important as well is being able to track all of your tasks. So we keep track of and inventory all of the user settings. Additionally, if something's changed, such as you change the settings or the parameters, we'll actually keep track of the old variables and the new variables. So going through this, you get pretty detailed information about what's happening throughout the environment. Now beyond that, we also have settings to go and actually take a look at the user's tasks. So we're going to essentially keep track of all of these tasks for up to 7 days in our database. So again, if you come back, you notice something's unusual, you can go back through the task to figure out who made a change and when it happened. Now we wanted to make sure that we can support the latest Windows Server and System Center features too for Nano Server. So we do some things that even System Center does not do. For example, we support HyperV Replica as a role. Now, HyperV Replica essentially allows you to go and take a virtual hard disk and go and copy it to a different location every 30 seconds, every 5 minutes, or every 30 minutes. We have all of this built in. So for us to set up replication on a virtual machine, it's as simple as turning it on and specifying which host you want to include as part of your replicated set. We also support Failover Cluster management as well. As I mentioned a couple of times, this Nano Server infrastructure is actually running on a highly available failover cluster. And so from here, I can do things such as creating the cluster, validating it, running the built-in tests, and deploying different highly available virtual machines. So we make sure to embrace clustering. And one of the newest features that we've added as well is our ability to do capacity planning. Now with capacity planning, this is going to be extremely useful if you're new to virtualization and setting up the environment for the first time, as this will actually let us monitor the utilization of your disk and free disk space, memory, free memory, so that you can start to predict when you're going to run out of capacity and need to start thinking about a new hardware acquisition lifecycle. Fortunately, no capacity issues have been detected for myself here. We also have a library that's built in. With our library, it's essentially a file share that stores different virtualization components that we may wish to reuse multiple times. So here we have the ability to store templates for virtual machines. If we click Edit, we'll see that we have similar settings to creating and managing a virtual machine. We have virtual hard disks, and we have ISOs as well. So lots of different ways that you can go and create components, make sure they're perfect, and then redeploy from a library. The benefits of using a library are that you get consistency. Once you get that virtual machine configured correctly for the first time and redeploy it multiple times, you make sure that you get it deployed the exact same way with the exact same settings each time. So this is going to speed up deployment as well as eliminate or minimize human error. And last but certainly not least, we have an antivirus edition as well. What this does is it provides agentless antivirus capabilities from Five9 Cloud Security within Five9 Manager. Now what this means is you can go and select one of our partners, Bitdefender, ThreatTrack, or Kaspersky, and we will partner with them and do antivirus and monitoring on your virtual machines, your virtual disks, and your virtual networks. And we make it extremely simple because we do not require any agents to be installed inside those virtual machines. So definitely consider this if you do not have an antivirus or security option that's designed or optimized for your virtualized environment. With that, that covers the key features, the key components that we have within Five9 Manager. I hope you can see that there's a lot here, and we've really tried to solve a lot of the main problems that you're going to find using the built-in tools. We have a unified, consolidated console, summarized information, and a lot of features which businesses of all sizes can take advantage of. Let me go ahead and switch back to the slide deck. All right, so hopefully you've learned a lot here. You've understood the best practices of Nano Server and the use cases, and you can see that Nano Server will be a powerful utility. But again, the biggest problem you're going to find with Nano Server is the ability to manage it with a very strict set of commandlets using PowerShell and scripting. But fortunately, this is where Five9 comes in. We are the leading Nano Server management solution. If you are interested in checking it out, please go to five9.com/nanoserver. We also have virtual labs, which provide you with a full interactive interface. So you can follow our tasks. You can actually go and create different virtual machines without having to install anything inside your own data center. So check out the labs as well. And certainly reach out to us when you're ready for your 30-day trial. With that, we are going to wrap up the presentation here, and we're going to go over to the Q&A. Ryan, do we have any questions that came through?
We sure do, Simon. We have quite a bit of them. I'll go ahead and start with a couple. I have one question regarding the Five9 software solution manager. Do I have to install any agents or do anything different to manage Nano Server?
Oh, that's a great question. You do not have to do any type of agent installation to use Five9 Manager on anything. So if you have Five9 Manager, you're managing traditional hosts, Nano Server hosts, traditional virtual machines or Nano Server virtual machines. Everything is done entirely agentlessly. We're going to go and communicate with those hosts and those virtual machines using either PowerShell or WMI, but everything is done completely remotely, so it's easy to set up, and as soon as that Nano Server host or VM comes online, we will be able to manage it and monitor it, just like any other virtual machine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. We have another question here. Is there any disadvantages or limitations of using virtual machines on Nano Server comparing with typical Hyper-V hosts?
No. So long as the role is supported in the Nano Server image, you should be fine. Now, the way that you want to really separate this is kind of thinking about whether the Nano Server will be used as the host or as the virtual machine. If your Nano Server is intended to be used either as the host or as the VM, you still just need to make sure that whatever roles you want to use within that VM are going to be supported by Nano Server. So for example, DNS is supported, but DHCP is not supported. Other than that, making sure that you follow those very strict guidelines about what will work and what will not work, everything else is the same, so easy to set up, configure, and manage. And as a best practice moving forward, yes, deploy Nano Server wherever you can. You've seen how it's faster, how it's more secure, so use that as your default option moving forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. We have another question here regarding the Five9 Manager solution. How easy is it to set up Five9 Manager?
Five9 Manager setup is actually one of our strengths. What we noticed within the Microsoft ecosystem was how people were struggling trying to set up System Center. It's so many components. It's distributed. You had to set up a separate SQL database and license it. It's painful. Five9 took a very different approach, and we have a unified installer. easy to use. It sets up everything. You simply get a virtual machine. You can use as small as 2 gigs of RAM, though we usually recommend 4 to 8 gigs of RAM for the VM. Put Manager inside that VM, and it just click, next, and you're set up and running. During the setup process, you have to specify a database to use. You can use SQL Server if you want, but we actually also include free versions as well, so you can use SQL Express Edition, or you can even use a built-in Windows database. So very easy to set up. It takes just a couple of minutes to go through everything, and significantly easier to get up and running than other products from Microsoft and other third parties.
Okay, great. We also have a question here. Can Nano Server be hosted on non-Hyper-V clouds such as EC2 or HP Cloud?
The answer to that would be based on whether they support Nano Server. So in theory, yes. I have seen Nano Server running in VMware, and I actually noticed there were kind of a couple of questions asking about VMware support as well, so I'll kind of touch on that at the same time here. But essentially, as long as the cloud, the hypervisor, whoever you're working with says they support Nano Server, it can work. Now, you got to keep a couple of things in mind here. When you're doing Nano Server on VMware, you're still creating the VMware virtual machine, but within that VMware virtual machine is the Nano Server operating system. So just conceptually keep that in mind, that the operating system and the virtualization platform can be independent. But if VMware says they supported it, which they do, and other clouds say they support it, I'm not sure for the specific cloud that you mentioned there, but I would assume they do. Absolutely, it's highly encouraged, and you're going to start to see most cloud providers want to go and support that, as well as most hypervisors want to support that. So if someone is not doing it today and you find out your cloud provider is not doing this, make sure you let them know and demand, I want Nano Server, I want support, and hopefully they will help you embrace it as well soon.
Okay, great. We have another question regarding the 5.9 Manager solution. With the Antivirus edition, do I have to buy any separate licenses for any of the antivirus partners?
No, that's one of the nice things about our solution. When you go and acquire 5.9, whether it's our security product or manager with antivirus, you essentially say which of the partners you want to work with or which of the antivirus. Again, that is ThreatTrack, Kaspersky, and Bitdefender. And with that, we handle all of the licensing, all of the royalties, all of the support, all of the installation. Now, what we've essentially done is taken their antivirus engine and optimized it for Hyper-V and for a virtualized environment. So we make it very easy. You come to us, and we will handle everything from licensing, installation, to support.
And so that brings up another licensing question. We have a person asking how licensing works for the 5.9 Manager solution. Is it per physical host?
That's a great question. We have tried to be consistent with Windows Server and System Center licensing. So the way we do our licensing today, before the introduction of Server 2016 and their new licensing model, is based on per 2 CPUs per host. So let's say, for example, you have a host that has 4 CPUs. That would require 2 licenses. But the easiest way to do this is just go to your inventory or to your accounts team and ask them how many licenses you have for the Hyper-V hosts, and that's how many licenses you'll need for 5.9. So if you need 10 Hyper-V licenses from Microsoft, you would need 10 5.9 licenses from us.
Okay, great. And there's a couple more questions here. Is 5.9 Manager equally suitable to manage multiple Windows Server 2016 Hyper-V as with Nano Server?
Yes, absolutely. We test everything with all the latest releases. We've been testing Windows Server 2016 for over a year and a half now, so that's fully supported. Again, we support, every guest operating system supported by Hyper-V as well. And a strength of ours, too, is we have backwards compatibility support all the way down to Windows Server 2008 R2. Even Microsoft has broken that backwards compatibility using HyperV Manager. So anything that's new, anything that's old, if it's Hyper-V, we're there to support it.
Okay, great. You know what, Simon? It seems like that was the majority of the questions, and we're coming to the end of the hour. So Tracy, why don't I kick it off back to you?
Oh, great. Well, I want to thank both of you for your great presentation today and great Q&A. We really appreciate you being here and taking the time to share all this information with us. Before we leave, we do want to ask everybody to share your thoughts about the webcast. A little survey will pop up, and if you can tell us what you thought, we'd really appreciate your participation. And finally, I'd like to thank the audience for attending today's event. The webcast was sponsored by Five9 Software and presented by Virtualization Review. Thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.